Next week, July 14th through 18th in legislative days, has been declared Crypto Week in Congress.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. The plan is for the House to vote on the Genius Act,
Okay.
which is legislation passed by the U.S. Senate to establish a regulatory framework for stablecoins,
Hmm.
as well as a similar bill called the Clarity Act, which is a House bill that mirrors closely the Genius Act. President Trump has said he wants the House to pass the Genius Act as is. Not surprisingly, both bills have been hotly contested by Democrats. Also to be considered next week will be a bill called the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act, which aims to curb potential privacy concerns and surveillance risks associated with central bank digital currencies,
Hmm.
which are digital forms of a country's official currency. Now, CBDCs are not part of the U.S. payments structure right now, so it's a bit of a preemptive
Okay.
but still, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we
And
all know how slow Congress is in
right,
getting
right.
things done, so it'll be interesting to see if
If
Crypto
they can do
Week
something. Yeah.
actually,
And
you know,
so that last thing you said, the CBDC is that like an anonymity type thing? Is that what you're talking about? The
yeah, that's
anonymity?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly, so that people don't get for privacy concerns, you
Got it.
know,
Got it.
and because the CBDC is a central bank digital currency.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so there's the prying eyes of the government, which people don't particularly care for.
Got it. Okay.
But, like I said, we don't have CBDCs here in the US, and
Hmm.
President Trump has decreed he doesn't want them here in the US.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting. I think, like I said, I think it's a preemptive move.
Okay.
Um, but it is interesting that they're going to take up the Genius Act and this thing called the Clarity Act because
Right.
things are taking off with stablecoins, and we really do need
Yeah.
some kind of regulatory box to put them in, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
interesting. All right. Well, we'll see if the politicians can actually get something done next week or
actually get something
yeah.
done, right? Well, they
Yep.
did get something done last week, so who knows? Maybe next
Yeah.
week they will. Who
Yeah.
knows?
All right.
Okay,
What's
so
next?
start speaking of stablecoins, there have been a lot of numbers thrown around about the size of the stablecoin market. But what is it really? Zach Abrams, I reported last week, the co-founder of stablecoin platform Bridge, estimated the current market capitalization of stablecoins to be $400 billion. And he said that could grow to 2 trillion by 2028. As of just to put that into perspective, the market cap of Visa and Mastercard card combined was 1.22 trillion
Wow.
as of July 1st, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, July 1st. Um, but the numbers crunchers and analysts at JP Morgan Chase think Abrams and others who have offered similarly optimistic projections are way off.
Yeah.
They say the current stablecoin market is about $15 billion and will reach only 500 billion by 2028.
Hmm.
And you know what? I kind of am trending towards that. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously Abrams has something to,
Hmm.
he has a vested interest in making sure this is big, right?
Right. Right. Or making
And
everybody feel like it will eventually be big so that they want to
yeah,
put more
it'll
in.
eventually be big, but I don't think, it'll take as long as it'll happen as quickly
Right.
as
Well, and I
everybody
think,
expects.
and yeah, and I think it's always, to me, whenever I hear these prognosticators with this type of thing, I feel like the thing that they always tend to forget is the change in consumer behavior. It's like
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
always like, well, as long as this great technology exists, everyone will obviously use it. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
People are not like, oh yeah, there's an advantage. I will immediately take advantage of it. No, there's going to be earlier adopters. They're going to try it out. Then you have your next layer. Then you have your next layer. Then you have the long tail, and people slowly, so it's yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
look at mobile payments. I mean, that's a perfect example.
right, right,
I
exactly.
mean, mobile payments had the longest tail of any payment mechanism I could imagine. I mean, 10 years ago, 10 mobile payments were were a possibility. The
Right.
technology existed, but it's only been within the last year or two that they've really taken off.
Right.
And
Right.
we can probably credit COVID with that, but I think it
Right.
also is just consumer adoption takes
Yeah.
time.
Well, I mean, even credit cards, it's like
Right.
we're not at 90% card payments right now, even
No.
though there's been a significant advantage over cash for the last 40 years.
Right.
No, people are like, I still am going to use cash sometimes. And so,
I
you know,
right. I heard a statistic the other day that said credit, debit, and ACH combined only make up 79% of payments.
yeah,
And
right.
that's nowhere near ubiquity.
No, and it's been around for decades and decades. I mean, so
I mean, almost 100 years. Well, no. Uh, the first credit card was like, the first like Visa card was like 1960. So what are we
right,
talking?
70 years almost,
70
65.
years. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a long time.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and debit cards. I remember a friend of mine getting getting his credit card back in the early 80s, and they said, "Oh, you could use this for debit." And he, called me up and said, "What the heck is debit? What is this all about?"
Right, right,
I
right.
don't
And that's the
it's
thing is, 5 years from now, there's still going to be a lot of consumers that are going to be like, wait, what's a stable coin card? Why would I use that?
right.
So
Exactly.
it's, there'll
Exactly.
be innovation. It'll happen quickly, but that doesn't mean there won't be a long tail. So,
Right. I agree. So
okay.
here's one that's a real interesting one. A U.S. District Court judge in Illinois has dismissed a lawsuit accusing MasterCard and Visa of conspiring with Apple to suppress network competition.
Hmm.
The judge ruled that the merchants hadn't provided enough evidence to support their claim that Apple illegally declined to launch a competing payment network to rival Visa and MasterCard. He said they only presented, quote, a slew of circumstantial evidence.
Hmm.
The lawsuit alleged Visa and MasterCard paid, quote, ongoing cash bribes that amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars a year to keep Apple from competing with them. Apple claimed it had never had any plans to enter the payments network market and compete with Visa and MasterCard.
Hmm.
And I gotta side with Visa, Mastercard, and Apple on this one. I mean, why would Apple want to? It makes all this money on its phones and on its apps. Why would it want to get into, you know, competing with entrenched payment networks?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think ultimately, I think the payments industry, as a general rule, we often see innovation. I think stablecoin's another example of this, where we see this innovation and we naturally think that this is going to blow up everything. But in
Right.
reality, it's so tantalizing to just say, "Hey, these rails already exist.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use that." And I think Apple did the same thing. And again, I think it's also a misunderstanding of how the payments industry works, where everybody thinks that Visa Mastercard are making all the interchange, and they're not.
Right.
So does Apple want to be their own bank? Yeah, they are actually in some ways they are
In some
collecting
ways, they
interchange,
are. Right.
right? And
But
so
there's a
they're
difference
they're getting
between
a
being
big
a
chunk
bank
of
and a
it.
network.
Right. In other words, they don't want to, Apple doesn't want to create this network. They have to tie all of the stuff together to be able to accept the Apple Card, because why would they do that? They can pay such a small amount to Visa and MasterCard to do that, to be the rails. They want the interchange. They don't want the card brand fees. So,
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So,
yeah, very interesting.
it's interesting. I think, my feeling is that merchants just like throwing things at the court and see what they can get
Yeah, of course.
because, who
Because
knows?
this is
Maybe they'll
America.
find a friendly judge.
Yeah, right. Uh, Interesting. I think you have one more for us today, right, Patty?
Yeah, one more. And this is interesting. President Trump signed an executive order earlier this year, and I believe I reported on this, mandating that the US Treasury start phasing out checks beginning September 30th. That's
Mm,
not that far away.
right.
Now, Treasury put out a request for information on, okay, what should we do in lieu of checks?
Yeah, like how do we get rid of this? Yeah.
How do we do this? And they received hundreds of letters, and many of them were expected recommendations considering the authors. Nacha, for example, touted the benefits of using the ACH. The card brands pushed their networks and products. The clearinghouse put forth using RTP, the real time payment
Hmm.
network.
Sure.
Several banking groups agreed RTP or FedNow, the Fed's real-time network, would be the way to go. And just as a ha-ha, retailers used the common opportunity to push the Fed for adoption of new lower debit interchange rates, which
Mm,
was like
right,
that
right,
doesn't have anything to do with this
right,
comment
right.
period. But
Sure.
that's how
Yeah.
retailers get. But the one that I found to be the most interesting, though, came from early warning services. Now, you remember last week I explained to you early warning
Mhm.
services is a fintech that's owned by many of the largest banks in the country.
Right.
And it also operates Zelle, which is the
Yeah.
peer to peer payment network that competes with Venmo.
Yep.
Um, Now, it touted Zelle as affording, quote, near instant delivery of funds and having, quote, lower fraud rates than checks, ACH, and card based payments. But here's the thing: three of the largest banks and owners of early warning services were sued last year by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for failing to adequately protect Zelle customers from financial fraud and scams.
Hmm. Well, and I wonder
So,
though if I wonder if that would end up being a big consideration in this context because, um, if we're talking about the Treasury, I doubt there's a tremendous risk of fraud in those payments anyway, right? I mean, isn't this going out to larger businesses and organizations and
yeah,
government entities, et
yeah,
cetera?
but we have a whole lot of issues with Social Security checks being
That's
stolen.
true.
Don't you think the crooks are going to
Sure.
find a way to and
Sure. Yeah, good point.
insinuate themselves into this network?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Now
true.
that lawsuit
Yeah.
has since been dropped by the Trump administration, so it's no longer
Right.
per
Hanging over their heads, but yeah.
hanging over their heads. But you know, ranking Democrats on the House and Senate committees for with oversight for banking, as well as the Senate subcommittee on investigations, is still kind of pushing this. They sent a letter to Zell last week, demanding to know what it's doing to track and stop social media scams that use the network to bilk Americans, because
Mhm.
a lot of these scams are on social media
Yeah,
platforms.
sure.
And just to sort of put that in perspective, J.P. Morgan has already begun to block Zelle payments that originate from social media sites.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I, I put in my crook mind, my crook
Yeah,
hat
yeah.
for a second. Not that I'm a crook, but I'll,
Right.
think like that. And I've been writing about this stuff long enough to know how they think, and I could see them, you know, getting sending a, a tweet of some sort, or just sending a Facebook notice, for example,
Sure.
right, to grandma saying, "Hey, your Social Security is at risk. We need to have your number so that we can,
Right, sure.
fix this problem,"
Hmm.
and then have all the money come to them. I mean,
Yeah.
that happens already.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it'll be
Almost
interesting.
seems like what could be really interesting though would be if they use like the Zelle, Rails, but they made their own kind of branded version of it for the Treasury. Something like that where,
That's an excellent idea. Yeah,
or then it could
that
be,
could.
yeah, then it wouldn't be about, hey, Zelle. It's like, no, like this is the Treasury distribution network or whatever. And it's like, some they
Right.
could almost white label the tech from somebody else, but build out like a robust, you know, payment
Sure.
network almost on top of somebody. I think you did with Visa Mastercard as well, but building that on somebody else's rails to where it would
Or
be
Fed
very
now.
clear.
I mean,
Yeah, right.
Fed now to
Sure.
me would be the most obvious the most
Yeah, sure.
logical way to do that,
Right. Yep.
because it would have all the guardrails necessary. It's
Yep.
government to government, cooperation.
Yeah. Good
So,
point. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, good
Well,
stuff,
that's
Patty.
it for this week.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much
Thanks.
for all the time you put into researching this stuff, and we're ready to hear again next week.
I appreciate it, man.